Part 1, The Shattered Promise. The room buzzed with hushed whispers as my heart pounded in my chest. The scent of fresh roses and perfume lingered in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of candle wax from the towering candelabras. The grand chandelier above cast a golden glow upon the altar, where I stood in my pristine white dress, clutching the ring in my trembling fingers. This was supposed to be my happiest day. The day I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. But in an instant, the fairy tale shattered. "I need a 5-minute break," Steve Turner, my soon-to-be husband, announced suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd as he turned away from me, my fingers barely brushing his sleeve as he stepped down from the altar. My heart pounded harder, my breath shallow. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Then, in front of everyone, Steve knelt down before another woman. Emily Wilson. My body went cold, a slow sink-in. Dread settling deep within me as he gazed into her tear-filled eyes. "Emily," he whispered, his voice full of something that had never been there for me. A tenderness so raw, so deep, it felt like a blade slicing through my chest. "I once promised you, I vowed to you, in front of everyone. If there's an afterlife, will you marry me?" Gasps erupted throughout the hall. My vision blurred as a wave of shock crashed over me. My fiancé, the father of my unborn child, was kneeling before another woman. My legs wobbled beneath me, and for a second, I thought I would collapse. Emily sobbed, her delicate hands covering her trembling lips. Then, she nodded, her shoulders shaking as she threw herself into his arms. The guests held their breath, eyes darting between us, waiting for me to react. Waiting for the bride to crumble. Instead, I took a deep breath, forcing down the bile rising in my throat. I stepped forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Emily lifted her tear-streaked face, her gaze meeting mine. "Riley," she choked out, I couldn't marry Steve in this life. But please, take good care of him for me." Something inside me snapped. A sick, twisted sense of amusement bubbled up inside me as I smiled. I reached for my bouquet, the delicate white roses trembling in my hands. Then, with deliberate slowness, I placed them into Emily's arms. "Why wait for another life?" I said coolly, tilting my head. "If you can't let go of this rotten cucumber, then I'll give him to you now." A stunned silence fell over the hall. I felt my nails digging into my palm, the pain grounding me. For 10 years, I had bent over backward, trying to win the approval of Steve's family. I thought that if I married him, if I carried his child, he would finally settle down. That he would choose me. But this wedding wasn't about love. It was an obligation. A duty, forced upon him because of the baby inside me. And now, in front of everyone, he was proving what I had feared all along. He didn't love me. My chest tightened, the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing down on me. But before I could dwell on the pain, Emily suddenly clutched her chest, her body swaying. A sharp cry escaped her lips as she collapsed into Steve's waiting arms. "Emily!" Steve panicked, his face twisted. With fear as he lifted her effortlessly. Without hesitation, he turned on his heel, striding toward the exit. He didn't even glance back at me. Didn't care that he had just humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. But before he disappeared through the doors, he did turn, just for a moment. His eyes burned with fury. "You're vicious and small-minded," he spat, his voice laced with disgust. And then he was gone. The silence was deafening. My parents, my in-laws, the guests, everyone stared at me as if I was the villain in my own wedding. My mother, eyes filled with shame, rushed forward and grabbed my arm. Riley, what are you doing? She hissed, her nails biting into my skin. Go after Steve. Apologize. Tears welled in her eyes. You need to make this right. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Make it right? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My father, standing beside her, let out a cold sigh. Take care of yourself, Riley, he muttered, shaking his head before pulling my mother away. My mother-in-law, no, former mother-in-law, took the opportunity to twist the knife even deeper. She crossed her arms, her lips curling in disdain. I told Steve not to marry a low-class country girl like you, she sneered. If you want to be part of this family, you need to learn to swallow your pride. Never embarrass your husband in public. I felt my nails bite deeper into my palm, but I didn't react. Not an amour. I had spent a decade trying to be enough for them. And now, as I stood there, abandoned, humiliated, heartbroken, I realized the truth. No amount of effort would ever make them accept me. And I no longer wanted to be a Turner. One by one, the guests left. The whispers followed me like ghosts as I stood alone in the grand hall, my wedding dress heavy against my skin. The rain outside matched the turmoil inside me, the storm crashing against the windows as if the heavens themselves were weeping for my shattered love. I turned my gaze toward the exit, my decision crystal clear. This was the end of my old life. And the beginning of something else entirely. Part 2, the breaking point. The rain poured in sheets, drumming against the pavement as I stepped out of the hotel, my white wedding dress dragging behind me, soaked and heavy with mud. The weight of the fabric mirrored the crushing despair in my chest. My entire world had crumbled in mere moments, and now, I had nowhere to go. I stood there, shivering, my fingers tightening around the bouquet still clutched in my hand. The Turner family had abandoned me. My parents had left me with nothing. Gee, but shame and scorn. My husband, no, Steve, was with her, the woman he had never let go of. I took a deep breath, blinking against the cold rain. Then, I reached into the folds of my dress, searching for my phone. No signal. Of course. This resort hotel was situated halfway up the mountain, miles away from any proper reception. A waiter standing near the entrance hesitated before approaching me, his eyes filled with sympathy. He extended an umbrella, his voice gentle. Miss, do you need help? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile despite the sharp pain slicing through my chest. Thank you, I whispered, taking the umbrella with shaking hands. The weight of the day crashed down on me as I staggered forward, making my way down the winding path. The mountain road was treacherous, the storm making it slick and dangerous. My heels sank into the mud, my dress snagging on rocks and branches, but I didn't stop. I had to leave. I had to get away from this nightmare. Each step was agony. My feet, raw and bleeding, screamed with every movement. Yet I pressed on. Finally, my phone vibrated. A signal. I glanced at the screen, my stomach twisting as Steve's name appeared. My fingers hovered over the decline button. But then, curiosity won, and I tapped the message open. Steve, Riley, how could you be so heartless? Emily was so frightened that she collapsed. She's in the hospital now, and it's all because of you. Do you even care? A bitter laugh bubbled in my throat. Because of me? I stared at the screen, rain dripping from my lashes. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Me, you humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. You shattered our wedding. And now you blame me for her collapsing? Are you even listening to yourself? Almost immediately, another message came through. Steve, you need to own up to your mistakes. I've indulged you for 10 years, Riley. Do you really think anyone else would want you, especially after you trapped me by getting pregnant? I stopped walking, my entire body going rigid. My breath caught in my throat as I reread his words, each letter slicing through me like a knife. Trapped him? After everything? After years of being by his side, enduring his family's disdain, bending over backward to prove my worth. I clenched the phone, my nails digging into my palm. My vision blurred, not from the rain, but from sheer, burning fury. At that moment, an other message came through, but this time from an unknown number. A video. With trembling fingers, I pressed play. The image flickered to life, a hospital corridor. Emily, lying on a bed, her hand tightly held by Steve as they waited for a doctor. He kissed her fingertips, his tearful voice whispering, "Emily, you have to be okay. Please, don't scare me like this. I don't know what I'd do without you." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped me. I remembered when I had fallen in the bathroom due to low blood sugar, back when I first discovered I was pregnant. I had broken my leg and had been terrified, alone in a hospital for 2 weeks. Steve never visited. On that same day, Emily had cut her hand while cooking. The doctor had warned her that she might have a scar. Steve had spent the entire day comforting her. I stared at the screen, the past and present colliding in a nauseating wave. How had I been so blind? How had I wasted 10 years of my life chasing a man who had never truly been mine? The coldness seeped into my bones as I turned away from the road and raised my hand to hail a taxi. My decision was already made. The moment I stepped into the cab, my phone rang again. "Steve." I answered, my voice devoid of emotion. "What?" His voice was frantic. "Emily had a heart attack because of you. UN. ED to come here and apologize to her immediately." Thunder rumbled in the distance. I could hear Emily crying softly in the background, her voice weak yet purposeful. "Riley. I'm so sorry. Maybe I should have died abroad instead." Steve's voice hardened. "See what you've done? It was only 5 minutes. If you hadn't been so selfish, I wouldn't have had to leave you behind." A slow, eerie calm settled over me. I exhaled through my nose and spoke the words that had been forming in my heart. See the moment he turned his back on me. Divorce. Silence. The air between us crackled with tension. Finally, he let out a disbelieving scoff. "You're being ridiculous. You're just upset. We'll talk when you calm down." I closed my eyes, feeling the last remnants of my foolish love for him dissolve into nothingness. "No, Steve," I said. "I am calm. And I want a divorce." For the first time, there was no hesitation. No fear. No doubt. His voice was a mix of rage and panic. "Riley, don't you dare." I hun. Gee up. Outside, the storm held, but inside the taxi, I was eerily calm. A notification popped up on my screen, Steve's message. "Steve, you need to own up to your mistakes. I've been patient with you for a decade. Do you think anyone else would want you? Especially after you trapped me by getting pregnant?" My lips curled into a smile. He had no idea who he was talking to. I turned to the driver. "Take me to the hospital." The man glanced at me in the rearview mirror, unsure. "Are you sure, miss?" I nodded. "Yes. But not to see Steve." It was time to end this. Part 3, The Point of No Return. The hospital lobby smelled of antiseptic and lingering grief. Nurses moved in a quiet rhythm, their eyes filled with the exhaustion of a long night's work. I walked through the entrance, my mud-stained wedged in. Dress clinging to my skin, a trail of dirty water pooling on the pristine white tiles beneath me. A receptionist noticed me immediately, her brows knitting together in concern. "Miss, do you need medical assistance?" she asked, glancing at my soaked and disheveled appearance. I shook my head. "I'm here for an abortion." The words left my lips in a whisper, but they carried the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. The receptionist's eyes flickered with surprise, but she nodded and gestured toward the elevator. "3rd floor. You'll need to consult with a doctor first." I followed her directions without hesitation. My mind was clear. There was no more room for second thoughts. The baby I carried deserved a life filled with love, warmth, and stability, not as a pawn in the Turner family's twisted games. And certainly not with a father who saw them as nothing more than a burden. As I stepped onto the 3rd floor, my phone rang again. "Steve." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen before finally answering. "What?" His voice was sharp, laced with frustration. "Where are you?" "You better not be doing something stupid, Riley. We need to talk." I inhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the phone. "I'm at the hospital." A pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Good. Finally, you're thinking straight. You should be here apologizing to Emily. The press conference is in 2 days, and I'm not here for Emily." My voice was steady, cold. "I'm here to get rid of the only tie I have left to you." Silence. A long, heavy silence. Then, "You wouldn't dare." I could almost hear the panic creeping into his voice. "Watch me." The line went dead. I turned toward the nurse, who was patiently waiting for me to sign the consent forms. "I'm ready." The next few minutes passed in a blur. The sound of the ultrasound machine humming to life, the soft rustle of papers, the doctor's voice askin. "Are you sure? The baby is healthy. We can give you more time to think." "No need," I replied firmly. Just as I was about to lay down on the operating table, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Annoyed, I almost ignored it, but something inside me told me to answer. "Hello?" A frantic voice filled my ears. "Miss Moore? This is Nurse Jenkins from the emergency department. Your husband, Steve Turner, has been injured. He's in critical condition. UN. ED to come immediately." I sat up, my heart stopping for a brief moment. "What?" "There was an incident in the parking lot. He was stabbed." Her voice was urgent. "Please hurry." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone tighter. "Stabbed? By who? And why should I care?" I forced myself to take a deep breath. This doesn't change anything. Steve Turner had done nothing but break me, humiliate me, push me aside like I was disposable. Yet, despite everything, a small, weak part of me still felt something. Anger? Sadness? I couldn't tell. "Miss Moore? Are you still there?" I exhaled sharply. "I'm coming." When I arrived at the emergency room, the chaos was overwhelming. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, voices overlapping as they shouted out instructions. I spotted Steve through the glass doors, his white dress shirt soaked in crimson, his usually proud face pale and drained of color. A deep gash ran across his abdomen, and blood dripped onto the floor. My breath caught in my throat. He looked fragile, weak, vulnerable. A nurse noticed me lingering by the doorway. "Are you family?" I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm his wife." The words felt foreign on my tongue. She gestured for me to step inside. I hesitated before moving forward, my heels clicking against the tile floor. As I approached, Steve's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded his gaze. Then, recognition. "Riley," he murmured, his voice hoarse. I stopped at the foot of his bed, my arms crossed. "Who did this to you?" He let out a weak chuckle, wincing immediately. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." His head tilted slightly, and his lips curled into a bitter smile. "Emily." My entire body tensed. "What?" He coughed, a drop of blood staining the corner of his mouth. "She found out about the press conference. About how I planned to fix everything." His voice grew weaker, but his eyes remained locked on mine. "She didn't take it well." My mind reeled. Emily, the woman he had cherished. The woman he had thrown everything away for. She had turned on him? She said if she couldn't have me, then oh, one could. A hollow laugh escaped me. How poetic. Steve attempted a smile, but it turned into a grimace of pain. "Riley. I was wrong. About everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh? You don't say." He exhaled shakily. "I know you don't believe me. But I never stopped loving you. I was just a coward. I didn't want to admit that I made the wrong choice." I studied him carefully, searching for a sign of deception. But all I saw was regret. Deep, soul-crushing regret. Too late. It was far too late. "Get some rest, Steve." My voice was quiet but firm. "You'll need your strength for the mess you created." I turned to leave. His hand shot out, weak but desperate, grabbing my wrist. "Riley, please, Dawn. Go." I looked down at his fingers wrapped around my skin, the same hands that had once caressed me with love, only to later push me away for another woman. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt nothing. I pulled my hand away, my expression unreadable. "Goodbye, Steve." I walked out of the emergency room, my steps light, my heart unburdened. For the first time in a decade, I was finally free. Part 4, The Reckoning. I left the hospital without looking back. The air was crisp, the storm heaven. G passed, but the cold still clung to my skin. The city was alive as ever, cars honking, people moving, their lives untouched by the chaos that had consumed mine. For the first time in a decade, I had no ties to Steve. No wedding. No child. No more bending over backward to prove my worth to a family that had never wanted me. I had closed the door to that chapter of my life, and yet, deep inside, there was an unsettling hollowness. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was the eerie silence that followed the final strike of a battle. I checked into a hotel that night, ignoring the unread messages and missed calls piling up on my phone. My mother had called 5 times. Steve's number, more than I could count. I let them all sit there, unanswered. Instead, I sat at the small desk by the window, opened my laptop, and began searching. New jobs. New cities. A fresh start. Turner Industries held influence in many places, but there were still opportunities beyond their reach. I refused to let them control my future. I had a message from a former client, a company expanding their operations overseas. They had seen the public scandal surrounding me and, instead of treating me like a pariah, they offered me a job. The salary was good. The position was stable. And most importantly, it was far away from here. I stared at the offer for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. A fresh start. Was I truly ready for it? Before I could decide, my phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Steve. Steve, Riley, please. Just meet me one last time. No games. No drama. I need to talk to you. I almost deleted it without reading further, but another message quickly followed. Steve, I owe you the truth. You deserve that much. The truth? I scoffed. He had 10 years to give me the truth, yet he chose deception, humiliation, and abandonment instead. And now, when it was all crumbling around him, he suddenly wanted to be honest? Still, something inside me itched. A part of me, the part that had foolishly believed in love, in commitment, wanted to hear it. Not for him. Not to rekindle anything. But for myself. I needed closure. The restaurant he chose was an upscale place in the heart of the city. A place we had once dreamed of going to together, but he always said he was too busy. I walked in, my steps slow and deliberate. He was already there, seated by the window, looking as though the past week had aged him years. His usual confident demeanor was gone. He looked human. When he saw me, relief flickered across his face. You came. I pulled out the chair across from him, crossing my arms. Say what you need to say. He let out a heavy sigh, running a hand through his hair. I was wrong about everything, Riley. I held up a hand. No. No excuses. No blaming the circumstances. If you really want to be honest, then tell me the truth, not a version of it that makes you feel better. He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, I ever wanted to marry you. A sharp sting shot through me, but I didn't flinch. I figured that out already. Go on. He exhaled shakily. At first, I thought I could learn to love you. You were kind, patient, always there. I told myself that if I stayed long enough, I'd feel something real. But the truth is, Emily never left my heart. I clenched my fists under the table. I had known this. I had always known this. But hearing it spoken so plainly was another wound I hadn't prepared for. Then, why did you stay? My voice was steady, despite the turmoil raging inside me. Why drag me along for 10 years? He looked down at his hands. Because you made it easy. You never asked for more. You never demanded my attention. You just accepted me as I was. I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. So, what? I was convenient? A placeholder until Emily came back? He flinched. I didn't think she would ever return. When she did, everything changed. I sat back, shaking my head in disbelief. You ruined me for someone who threw you away once before. And now, she's done it again. I hope it was worth it. His jaw clenched. I was a fool, Riley. I see that now. And I know I don't deserve forgiven. You're right. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. You don't deserve forgiveness. And you won't get it from me. His face twisted, pain flashing in his eyes. Riley. Goodbye, Steve. And just like that, I walked away. As I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air felt lighter, fresher. The weight I had carried for years was finally gone. I took out my phone, opened the message from my potential employer, and typed 2 words, I accept. This time, I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something better. Part 5, The New Dawn. The airport was buzzing with life. Families reuniting, lovers embracing, children tugging at their parents' hands in excitement. I stood in line at the departure gate, my suitcase in one hand and my passport in the other. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. For the first time in years, I was finally in control of my own destiny. As I handed my boarding pass to the attendant, my phone vibrated. A message from an unc. Own number. Unknown, Riley, please. Don't do this. Let's talk one more time. I didn't need to check the sender. I knew it was Steve. Without hesitation, I blocked the number. I had spent a decade living for someone else, waiting for his love, his approval. I had sacrificed my happiness, my dignity, my dreams. But now, I was walking away from all of it. As I stepped onto the plane, I felt lighter. The weight of the past no longer held me down. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of new bacon. Ings. The moment I settled into my seat, the flight attendant announced takeoff. I gazed out the window, watching the city shrink below me. Steve, the Turners, my parents, all of them were part of a chapter that had finally come to an end. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of a stunning coastline, the sun casting golden hues over the endless ocean. The air smelled of salt and freedom. I had built a new life in a new country, far from the suffocating expectations of my past. My job was fulfilling. My colleagues treated me with respect. I spent my weekends exploring, meeting new people, and embracing a life I had never allowed myself to imagine. I had thought that leaving everything behind would make me feel lonely. But instead, I felt free. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. A headline from back home. Breaking news, Turner Industries faces financial crisis amid scandal. I clicked on the article. Emily had betrayed them all. In a desperate bid to save herself, she had leaked sensitive company information to a rival corporation. Turner Industries stocks had plummeted. The once powerful family was now struggling to hold on to their empire. And Steve? He had disappeared from the public eye entirely. I stared at the screen, waiting for an emotion, relief, satisfaction, anything. But there was nothing. Just an overwhelming sense of detachment. Their downfall no longer mattered to me. For so long, I had let them dictate my worth. But now, I was beyond their reach. I turned off my phone, taking in the beauty of the world around me. The waves crashed against the shore, a reminder that life was always moving forward, always changing. And so was I. I had thought that love meant sacrifice, that happiness came from someone else's validation. But I had been wrong. Happiness was here, within me, waiting to be embraced. With a smile, I finished my coffee and walked toward my new life, one step at a time.